Racism was not America's original sin. It was America's original symptom, and its original sin was greed.
Singular greatest frustrations I've experienced is an inability to self-reflect and to really change and to repent.
I think that more often we're going to have to leave loud than have a quiet exodus.
But we have to do uncomfortable things to find greener pastures and to learn differently.
You're realizing the church as it stands isn't what you thought it was or hoped it would be. And in order for that to be true, you're going to have to take up your cross daily and follow Jesus.
Jamar, it is good to see you again, my friend, as always. You are a friend of the show. You've been on multiple times. I always like being extra careful. Let's say we have some new people in the audience, never heard of you. Give people the cliff notes of who you are.
I'm a historian, author, speaker. Most people know me from my first book, The Color of Compromise, and that was the truth about the American church's complicity in racism. So I talk directly about race and the church and justice. Also have a Substack, jemartisby.substack.com, where I write frequently about these issues. And I'm a professor of history at Simmons College of Kentucky. So I teach young folks, actually folks of all ages, about our nation's racial history and Black history.
Yeah, love that. Your book, and I said this many times, did change my trajectory in life. And I read Color of Compromise. It was such an eye-opening, like, whoa, had no idea this was going on. And so it really is full circle that I'm able to call you a friend, and we do a lot of work behind the scenes together. There's a reason why I invited you on to be the first conversation of 2025 for the podcast. And I've been thinking about this a lot. And maybe if you don't mind, I'll kind of flesh out the overarching thesis of where we're going to go today and why I hit you up and said, hey, we got to talk about this. I think this is really important.
Yeah.
So forgive the long-windedness, but let me just set this up. So obviously I started TNE December of 2020. I was still serving at my white evangelical church. I was a drummer there. I had my community there. I loved everything about it. I had a lot of questions about the bigger overarching direction of the church, which at that moment was really just the white evangelical church, right? I was really concerned and frustrated with all the Trump support. I was really getting frustrated with the response to Black Lives Matter, the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. That's when I found your book, and again, my eyes were opened. I was really concerned about the response to COVID and a lot of themes of no masking and it's tyranny. And so when I started TNE, I had a lot of questions and not a lot of answers, but I knew I had to pull some threads, and I had to ask other people out there on Instagram, hey, am I the only person as a Christian wrestling with this, right? Of course, turns out I wasn't. There was the deconstruction thing, and a lot of people like yourself and others are writing really important books. And so I kind of found almost overnight this world of people asking the same questions I was asking, and people like yourself who were educated and talented communicators to help people like me understand where a lot of this came from. And so very quickly, I feel like myself and a lot of people who found TNE, we all grew in many ways quick. The organization grew very quick. Our followers grew very quick. I had to grow very quickly. I think a lot of our audience was growing quickly. But one thing I always did every Saturday night, even after my church kicked me out or gave me an ultimatum, I should say that, either stop serving with them or stop TNE. After all of that, I would always say, Saturday night, hey, if you're serving at your evangelical church tomorrow and you're wrestling with all the things, maybe the nationalism or the theology, and you have community and you're not sure what to do with it, serve well because you're committed to doing it, and just know we need people on the inside pushing for the change that we want to see on the outside. Part of me still believes that, and a lot of me is really wrestling if that's the approach we need to have at this point in American history. Because as I have gotten deeper and deeper into understanding and witnessing the effect of white Christian nationalism in particular on the white evangelical church, watching people like Charlie Kirk and other massive right-wing media influencers touring megachurches, espousing such harmful propaganda, watching so many white moderate evangelicals try and play the both sides game, well, the radical left and the radical right. And then, of course, in 2025, we're walking into a Trump presidency because, and this is Robbie Jones data, PRRI, because really of white Christians, in particular, white evangelical Christians. And I'm struggling with, are we at the point where an organization like us should start encouraging white people to start leaving their churches to find greener pastures? Or is there still something to say about working within some of those systems to try and reform from the inside out? Also, while holding space for the reality that many people listening to this who are still in those churches probably have friends and a sense of community and belonging, and relationship really makes things more complicated than me on a screen just saying, leave your white evangelical church, it's all corrupt. Because maybe some of those churches are feeding their neighbors, and maybe some of those churches are doing some good things that we can all celebrate. So I wanted to talk to you about this because I know that you've had a really interesting trajectory. And I think that as a historian and someone who is just full of wisdom, I want to kind of flesh this out with you, like what you think about this idea, because I'm really struggling with how to navigate this approach. I don't want to come across harsh and callous, but also I don't know if on a structural level, on a white evangelical structural level, what we've mapped onto this church idea called white evangelicalism, I don't know if there's anything that is unique to that system that is worth saving. And I don't know what to do with this. This is my opening conversation starter.
I appreciate your honesty, and the tension is real, and not that you need it, but I completely validate all of your feelings and your many followers. And if that's you listening right now, there's reasons for this, and don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking that you are overreacting, being alarmist, anything of that nature. What you're seeing, and it's problematic. And now we got to figure out what to do with it. I just have one follow-up question before I dive into more. Is like, was there anything in particular for you, Tim, that brought this question on that you wanted to address it in length like this?
I think just the past few years of watching the data, 80, 82%, 84% white evangelicals, like just they're in the tank for Trump. This is not I held my nose situation. And also, I mean, Jamar, and I appreciate you saying that, like, we don't want to gaslight ourselves. Watching what Trump has said over and over about so many things, and we could be here for hours documenting them, and watching them, he's like Teflon in this regard. He has literally said, I would only be a dictator on day one. Ha ha ha. He's hilarious. He obviously is all about Project 2025. We documented this a million times over. No one really cared. He was found liable of sexually assaulting a woman. Evangelicals didn't care. I mean, there are just so many things about him and the people he's bringing in that are clearly, I don't want to use the term evil because I try and reserve that for like real crazy stuff, but it feels that way. It feels evil in so many ways. Like Pete Hegseth, a man with Crusader tattoos on him, who has been shaped by Doug Wilson theology, was picked by Trump to be in his cabinet. Now, that might not happen because of the Senate and confirmation, but it also might really happen. That is scary. And one more thing I'll say, then I'll stop. Just the fact that Trump has amassed the wealthiest administration in history. Goodness. This billionaire class of people, right? Elon Musk, the world's richest man. Again, James 5, scathing critique of the ultra rich who hoard their wealth at the expense of others. And that Christians celebrate this as somehow he's draining the swamp. They're either foolish, ignorant, or gaslit if they think that giving the foxes access to the hen house is somehow going to promote the flourishing of those hens. It's not. But it doesn't matter. Jamar, we've been beating this drum for 4 years now. 2 white evangelicals does not matter to them. And so I just don't know if whatever theology and worldview and consumption of media that this world has is worth saving, given that we tried so hard to smack them into reality and they go, nah. But Biden's a radical leftist. What the hell?
You're right.
Sorry, I'm really ranty today. I'm sorry to rant, but that's how I feel.
And that's appropriate. And no apologies for ranting about unrighteousness, because I think that's what we're dealing with here. There's a lot here.
There is.
So for the people who are wondering, should I stay or should I go? I believe life works in seasons, and you may indeed be called to a predominantly white evangelical church that exhibits all the signs that you just described, but it may be for a season. Now that works both ways. So if you discern, and only you can discern this for yourself, that you're in a season that says, I need to stay here. There's some more that I can do here. And it doesn't mean you'll change the entire organization, the entire congregation, but you have a contribution to make that is part of the broader picture, right? So that may mean, well, I need to remain here, especially as we go through this regime transition and all of that stuff. Maybe it's a critical season for you to be there and to be a voice of dissent and to be a voice of contradiction to the status quo. Maybe it works the other way too. Maybe you've been there for a season and that season is changing. Maybe you have contributed all you can contribute. Maybe now it is time to say, I have to take myself, my family, my perspectives elsewhere. Overall, what I would say to many Christians who are sort of in this tug and pull of should I stay, should I go? Is there anything here worth saving? More than likely, you feel a sense of guilt about wanting to leave. Like it's somehow wrong. And I want to tell you, you're probably not wrong. What we've done in Christianity a lot of times is we have weaponized this idea of commitment, that you have to stay in this church, in this congregation, heck, even in this job or this marriage. And that is a sign of your Christian faithfulness, right?
Yeah.
And what we're often being told to do is stay in toxic relationships. And you can have a toxic relationship with your church if that church is practicing unrighteousness, especially in these political ways that you've just outlined. I don't think that's what we're called to do. I don't think that's what our faith compels us to do. Love your enemies, yes. Forgive, yes. But that doesn't necessarily mean you stay in vital relationship with people who keep hurting you.
Right.
So I just want to put that out there for people who feel like because of their religion, because of their Christian faith, they have to stay. Maybe not. Maybe you were there for a season and maybe that season is changing. And that's okay. It's more than okay, because I want to put in one more idea here. The longer you stay somewhere where that season has ended, the longer you stay away from the place where a new season can begin. So it's not just that you're staying put and you're going through all of this stuff. It's also that you're not in a place where you should be. You're not in a place where you could be doing more good. And I can unpack more of that from my experience with changing from the Reformed African American Network to the Witness, a Black Christian collective, and my own journey into and out of evangelicalism as a whole. But that's just kind of and there's a whole history here we can talk about, the Black church.
Right.
But that's just beginning with the pastoral heart part.
Yeah, right. Okay.
We can hit you with the analytics later.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm wrestling with, you're the historian here, and this might be an ignorant statement because I don't really fully know. At first, I was a big fan of believing that, well, look, I mean, like the white evangelical church has changed over time. Segregation was so popular in those spaces. Now, obviously, it's not. But then as I dug into like the church growth movement and to other things, in the evangelical psyche, I realized, well, yeah, maybe it's not overt segregation, saying the quiet part out loud. But as far as the systems and processes, I mean, it's still pretty segregated in a lot of ways. And there's still a level of, for some people, they might not like the term, but of whiteness that really undergirds what white evangelicalism stands on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I'm wondering, I think on a broad systemic level, is like, is the whole foundation built on something that is just that you don't want to build on top of anything else? It doesn't matter how nice your new sheetrock and paint job is if the foundation is horse shit. If it's all corroded and moths have eaten it and the cement crusty and termites are in the walls, Doesn't matter how nice everything looks on the outside. The structure is still fundamentally flawed. And I'm just wondering, I think more than ever, if that's the perspective that we need to start taking a little more seriously of like, I don't care what you did, as a church, maybe locally, that's great. But the system you're a part of is
There you go.
fundamentally part of the reason why you still have poor people that you have to feed or that you have to give clothes to, right? And
Yes.
so I'm kind of on that
Okay.
maybe like meta level of just, is the system itself, can you change it?
All right. Yeah. Well, let's get into it.
All right.
So
Pastoral moment over.
we got to ask ourselves, why do white evangelical projects dealing with racial justice keep failing? Now, you can argue that they don't. I'm not going to sit here and have that argument. I think we need to move past that. What we need to ask is, why do they keep failing? And it's just to your point that there's something wrong structurally and foundationally with the way Christianity and race and politics formed and malformed in the history of this country. So you go back and you read a book like Unsettling Truths, Mark Charles, Sung
Yep.
Chan Ra. They
Yep.
go all the way back to the doctrine of discovery in the 15th century, wherein colonialism was wrapped up with the spread of Christianity. You can go to Christopher Columbus's diaries and his first encounters of indigenous people. And he said they should make good servants because they seem smart and they don't seem to have any religion. So they're blank slates for us to write on. And of course, what many people call the nation's original sin, race-based chattel slavery. Now, a lot of people call it our nation's original sin. You mentioned earlier, this is the wealthiest political administration we've seen. So what I tend to say is that racism was not America's original sin. It was America's original symptom. And its original sin was greed. It's all about the money from the beginning and to this day. And then now, if you want to get into the specifics about white evangelicalism, there are really compelling new conversations among historians of U.S. religion that there was no time of sort of pure evangelicalism when it wasn't wrapped up in questions of race, power, money in really troubling ways. So going all the way back to the first and second Great Awakenings and all of that stuff. My focus is second half U.S. history, particularly looking at race, religion, and social movements. And what I would argue, this is just Jemar Tisby speaking as the historian, is that when it comes to what we think of as modern evangelicalism, that is primarily a post-World War II phenomenon that arose in the context of anti-communism and capitalism, and it pitted these two forms of government and making money against each other, and it pitted it as a cosmic battle that communism was a godless form of government and that capitalism and the United States was a godly form of government and way of life. Now, wrapped up in anti-communism were these terrible misunderstandings of what it even is. And I'm not defending like, Russian communism or Chinese communism or all the abuses there, right? But what happened in the U.S. context was the idea of it got shaped into something that called collectivism.
Yeah.
Collectivism. And what people in the United States were saying, the talking heads, was, well, all communists want to do is throw everything in a pot and give everything to everyone equally, no matter how hard you worked. And that's against meritocracy. And by the way, all this civil rights stuff is a form of collectivism, because what they want to do with race is say, well, everybody's the same. We should all go to the same schools. We should ride at anywhere we want on the buses. And they want to essentially erase the distinctiveness of races into this one collective thing. And that way it is un-American. It is anti-white. And that's why you see picket signs that say race mixing is communism. So you're getting a sense of the history here. There's politics wrapped up here. There's ways of making money wrapped up here. There's race wrapped up here. And then churches get in the mix. Well, if communism is godless, then we can't support anything that looks like communism.
Right.
And of course, there's the Red Scare. There's J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. They're stoking all of these things. Now it starts to get really familiar with white Christian nationalism, because what does it rely on to motivate people? Fear.
So much fear.
And threat.
Yeah.
And this amorphous other that's taking over your neighborhoods, your jobs, your money. That is not new, y'all. We can trace this back at least to the post-World War II era, and certainly further back. But that's what I'm saying. Is there something wrong with the system? Yes. And if you don't believe me, like, there's more and more research. There's a new book out called The Religion of Whiteness by Glenn Bracey and Michael Emerson. The Religion of Whiteness, sociological study. Some people will remember Michael Emerson. He's the co-author of the book Divided by Faith, along with Christian Smith. So this is a 20-year, essentially, update from Divided by Faith. And they go even further in this book to say that it's not even just evangelicalism. It's not even just white evangelicalism, but actually it is a religion of whiteness, in which they argue that whiteness itself, which they are essentially defining as an experience of us versus them. In group, we get it. This is the way we're supposed to be. And that's what people are worshiping. And that's what people are promoting. Now, let's put practical legs on this. When you talked about Charlie Kirk, TPUSA, touring megachurches, I've never been. But I imagine, what do you feel like when you attend an event like that?
I can answer that.
You were there, yeah.
I can answer that. The feeling is interesting because I've noticed this dichotomy sometimes between the average Joe who bought a ticket because they like Turning Point stuff versus people on the stage. But there's a general sentiment of exactly what you just said. Someone or something is coming for us. And that is reflected in the the vendor area, right? There's this thing, like, for example, last year when I went, it was the big focus for the vendors was woke free shopping.
Wow.
This is woke free.
Wow.
Oh yeah, no, huge. They have something called, have you ever heard of the term the parallel economy?
Yeah, but not in this context.
Well, okay, in this context, there are organizations and businesses, one of them is called Freedom Square, that essentially is trying to curate all the Patriot-owned businesses that people should start shopping to. So, for example, don't go to Verizon for your cell phone service. Go to Patriot Mobile for your cell phone service.
Good Lord. Yeah. Don't
get your coffee from Starbucks as they're woke. Get it from literally Patriot Coffee. Don't do banking with PayPal. Here's a different merchant you should use for your business. And it's a huge thing. It's called the parallel economy. And so there's a huge sentiment of, we're under attack. They are coming for us. Usually, Jamar, you know this more than most, but it always rotates, right? A few years ago, it was CRT was the big talking point. In 2023, it was the immigrant. It was the invasion is coming, and it was a lot of wokeness, right? And so on and so forth. Now, we're recording this before I leave for America Fest in 3 days from now, technically. So I can't give people the update in right this second, but you can watch our video recap. Right. Yeah, DEI is a big thing. Groomers are a big thing. It is, unless, besides the term the left, it's always aimed at a minority group. It's the drag queen, it's the trans person, it's the DEI hire, it's the woke person, it's CRT, it's the immigrant. It's always about pitting their largely, well, I should take that back. It is largely white, but it definitely is, there's more diversity than you would expect, but it's still largely white. I'll put it that way. That group is always fearful of another minority group taking away whatever they have. Meanwhile, people like Charlie are operating organizations funded by billionaires. Trump himself has stacked the deck with billionaires. So obviously, once you see through it, you see exactly what's going on. But when you're there, a lot of energy around taking things back, because we're under attack.
My hypothesis, when they say make America great again or take it back, and you ask, well, when, right? I think it's 1952. We could put a year on it.
All right.
like this is before Brown v. Board. It is right after World War II. The United States is a newly emerged superpower. We're starting to experience the suburban boom. People are getting college educations. You can be a machinist at a factory and buy a single family standalone home with a yard and a picket fence. You've got Leave It to Beaver, all of these things, right? It is a new era of American cultural identity and global dominance. And it's an era when white people were the vast majority in every way. Aggregate population, who's in college, who's running the government, all of those things. So that's just my little conjecture. If they want to take it back, women were in the home.
Yes.
Gay people were in the closet, all of this stuff, right?
Well, I did debate an actual Christian nationalist a few weeks ago. He doesn't really have a huge platform, but he offered, and I was on Twitter. I said, yeah, I'll debate you for sure. And someone offered to host us. And honestly, I got him to say all the quiet parts out loud. I mean, I literally got him to say, I'm not sure if you saw the clip, Jamar, but okay. Yeah. So you saw the clip. I mean, he literally said in a Christian nation, you could legalize and regulate slavery, but gay people have to go back in the closet, and you cannot have gay people in society. And what I said to him, thank you. Thank you for saying the quiet part out loud. This is what people think about in Christian nationalist spaces, right? They have this, to your point, this romanticized version of a black and white world where dad goes to work at his job for 40 hours a week, and mom's at home with the kids, and everyone's really white, maybe blue eyes and blonde hair, and life is just perfect. There's no major problems. And then the woke came to town. The liberals took over. Communism invaded. And look where we are now. Crime is up. Immigrants are invading everywhere. People are doing drag queen story hour. The horror, right? That's how the propaganda works to make that largely, again, white base, or the whiteness, I should say, of a base, all stirred up thinking we have a real problem on our hands.
And what Bracy and Emerson are getting at in their book, Religion of Whiteness, is when you get into those spaces, whether it is a group as small as your family or friends, or a mega event like a TPUSA or Heritage, whatever might be, you have a sense that right now what we're experiencing, this is the way things are supposed to be.
Yes.
And there are all these others who are trying to take this away. And we need to defend this like it's a holy mission. And that's where you get this language of the Crusades and whatnot, and a holy war and all of that stuff.
Right.
And what they're defending is that sense that white is right.
Yeah.
That when white people are in charge, when they have power, when everything is going the way they want it to, the world is a better place. And it's a better place not only for white people, but for everyone else. So why don't you just let us take over? And all the people who are resisting that, you're holding America back. You're sending our country down the tubes.
Yes.
Now, if that's the context you're in, I'm just going to be straight up. I'm not telling you to leave because I don't know your particular situation, but I am telling you, I'm telling you to ask yourself, why are you really there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why are you really there? And don't take your first answer. Don't take your second answer. Maybe when you get to your third answer, you're starting to get to it. Because that third answer is probably going to be things like, well, I'm scared to leave.
Right.
I don't like it here, but at least it's familiar.
Right.
It's predictable. Where else would I go? What's on the other side? What will people say about me? Will they reject me if I start speaking up about this, or I tell them I'm uncomfortable, or I say I want to leave, or I want to push harder for change? That's typically what's really behind the tension people feel about leaving or staying. I'm big on mind, body, spirit connection. When you enter a space, your body tells you what you really think before your brain short circuits it. So how do you know? When you enter that space, do you feel like you're preparing for battle? Like, you got to psych yourself up.
Right.
When you go into that space, whether that's a physical space or even just, a relational space, do you physically tense up a bit? Or do you feel relaxed, maybe even more relaxed and calmer, like this is a space of rejuvenation and healing? Do you have to kind of strategize how you maneuver in that space? All right, who am I going to talk to? What am I going to say if they say this? Do I bring up the Facebook post that I saw?
Mm-hmm.
All of that, right? Like you're having to devise a plan for almost every interaction. Um, is it a place where your relations feel safe? If you have a spouse or children, companions, maybe you can maneuver there okay because you're a known entity or you fit in. But can other people? I'll tell you this: as a black man, uh, black women feel the truth of a community long before even I do
Mm.
as a black man. And if we are not paying attention to those voices, which are at the intersections, that's another word the right hates,
Yep.
intersectionality,
Right.
at the intersections of racism and sexism, all other kinds of marginalized kind of identities. If we don't listen to those voices, then we can be complicit in perpetuating some of the harms that are going on. Because even if it's okay for us, if it's not okay for my neighbor, then there's still a problem.
Mm. Where do you think the wisdom is between leaving quietly and leaving loudly?
Okay. So we had a podcast series on Pass the Mic called Leave Loud.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, early 2021. So
Mm.
it's still in the sort of wake of the George Floyd protests and all of this push toward racial justice. And it came about because there was an article in the New York Times that was named uh, A Quiet Exodus. A
Mm.
Quiet Exodus. And it was talking about Black people kind of leaving out the side door
Right.
of their predominantly white evangelical churches in the wake of not only George Floyd, but Trumpism and Black Lives Matter and everything that we've seen in the past 8-10 years, right?
Right.
And I was kind of one of those. I was deep in Reformed and evangelical circles. Through a series of unfortunate events, it became very clear that I could not remain in those circles. So I sort of got pushed out. And then at some point, I turned around and started walking out. And then, but I didn't make a big deal of it at the time. That was for two reasons. Number one, I still had respect for a lot of the people in those circles. So
Yeah.
a lot of the pushback I got was either from leadership, which didn't represent the entire body, or it was from like online trolls that were sort of influencing the body, but not really in it. So I didn't want to put everybody on blast or lump everybody in the same category. That was one reason. Another reason was I was still healing.
Yeah.
So one thing Tyler Burns, my co-host on Pass the Mic, said is he said, "Speak from your scars, not from your wounds."
Mm.
And so what that means is it's not the time while you're still in the midst of bleeding to talk about the harm. Why? Because you still have to heal. So I'm writing a book now. It's my first memoir. It's tentatively titled Notes from an Evangelical Reject.
Mm.
And it's about that time into and out of white evangelicalism. But it has taken 5, 7, 8, 10 years in some cases for me to sufficiently heal enough from
Yeah.
these wounds
Yeah.
to be able to speak publicly about it. All that said, should you leave loudly? Should you do a quiet exodus? One of the things that I think is critical is, what does your presence in a place communicate to others?
Yeah.
So I've had to walk very carefully because I don't want to be in spaces and others look at me and say, well, if Jamar's there, it's probably a safe place for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want them to get that impression if that's not true.
Right.
And so if I'm leaving, I also want people to know, hey, I'm leaving because of XYZ. And that may not be your experience, but I do want you to know going in ahead of time what they don't tell you on the brochure.
Right.
some of the things that you can expect, right?
Right.
Whether it's, their political stances, their racial stances, their stances on sex and gender, et cetera, et cetera. It's a personal decision. Here's what I would do. Go through all the established channels to air your grievances. Every church, every nonprofit, every organization ought to have some steps that you can take to raise a concern.
Hmm.
I say for the purpose of integrity, go through those steps.
Hmm.
Best case scenario, it works. The process works as it's supposed to. You raise a concern, you go through the process that they outlined, and it actually results in tangible, positive change. That's what you want, I hope. That's a good check on your motives.
Right.
Do you want the organization to change for the better, or do you just kind of want to be heard?
Right.
Nothing wrong with wanting to be heard, but why?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just to let people know you're mad, or is it to work toward positive change? So then, though, here's the likely instance. Let's talk about institutions in a moment. But here's the likely outcome. Not much will change.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, there could be blowback on you for even raising the concern. Then you really come to the decision, do I go public with this? And that's a question of what are the stakes? What is the issue you're raising? Is it real harm? Like, we're talking about sexual abuse, we're talking about emotional abuse,
Right.
we're talking about abuse of power, right? Or is it they're not moving fast enough? Maybe, that's causing harm too. But there's levels to this thing,
Yeah.
right? So if there's like urgent crisis harm, you may need to go public because you want to prevent other people from being harmed as well. If it's not, maybe your shouting is with your feet. You've moved, you've left, and that in itself is a loud message, perhaps. So if you want to know what I really think,
I do.
I think that more often we're going to have to leave loud than have a quiet exodus.
I agree. No, I'm sorry. I agree. Hi friends, if you're enjoying this video, I have a favor to ask. The New Evangelicals is a 501c3 nonprofit, and if you've looked around at all, you've probably noticed that we don't offer member subscriptions on YouTube or Patreon options. The reason for this is very simple. It's been our mission since the beginning to offer all of our content and community resources completely paywall free. What this means is that we are completely dependent on the generosity of people like you who donate to make this work possible and accessible for all. If our content has helped you, would you consider donating to keep it all going? You can find the link in the description of this video, and to be very clear, this is not about giving to God or something like that. We're not a church and this is not a tithe. The ask is so simple. If our work has helped you, would you be willing to help us make this content accessible to more and more people? All donations made in the US are tax deductible, and every bit helps. Thank you for your generosity. I'm extra fiery, I guess, but I've been thinking about this for weeks now, stewing on it, and here we go. But one of the singular greatest frustrations I've experienced in the white evangelical subculture ethos thing is an inability to self-reflect and to really change and to repent.
Say that.
They push individual repentance for you as a person. They push that, all people are equal at the cross, etc. That's great, but they have no eyes or ability to see systemic repentance or to see how, as an organization or as an institution or as a part of a larger culture, why are these outcomes always so consistent, right? What's the deeper thing going on? And I don't know. Actually, that's not true. I believe that we're looking at a subculture that is just not going to shift. They're not going to change. They have access to power. They have access to political power. They're in bed with billionaires, some of them. There's a well-established network of publishing companies and movie industries and worship, albums and mega churches that export stuff like this all the time, all over the place to keep people kind of inside the system. And I really think that, and I'll be honest, Jamar, I'm really wrestling with a lot of this because I don't want to come across as an extremist, quote unquote, but I think that sometimes extreme times call for some extreme measures. And I think that one of them is a mass exodus from the white evangelical church and let the systems collapse. Like it really, and of course, what do we do in lieu of that, right? And what I don't mean to you white folks out there is starting new white churches.
There we go.
I mean, maybe you just become participants in different types of churches where you sit and learn. I'm kind of thinking about Bonhoeffer, how he was so changed by being a part of the church in Harlem, how that shifted him. He wasn't a pastor there. He wasn't on staff. He was just there to learn. And I think that a lot of people who are maybe considering, do I leave? Yes, it's scary. It's uncomfortable. Listen, I don't want to go to a new church for the first time, especially one that isn't predominantly white. I know what I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb. Okay. Dude, true story. I visited Reverend Otis Moss III's church last year, and he invited me. And man, I was an ignoramus. I brought a backpack in. That was a big problem. I didn't even know. I'm wearing what I used to wear, just all black, just black jeans and a black t-shirt. Oh, dude, I know. I had no clue. Everyone's eyeing me up. I took a picture. Someone comes over. You can't take pictures in here. I'm so sorry. And then Reverend Otis Moss's team finds me, puts me in the very front, like pew. He makes me stand up for everyone. I'm like, oh my God, I just want to blend in. So truly, I understand how for some people that can be uncomfortable. I get that. But we have to do uncomfortable things to find greener pastures and to learn differently. You're not going to get better theology by going to more white evangelical churches. You're just not.
Say that.
You're not. You're just not. Even, and I have many friends who are white progressive pastors who do great work. This is no shade to them. We need a different paradigm of thinking entirely, right? People like me and others should be learning from the black church in our local neighborhood. We should be working and just sitting at their feet and just learning a different way of thinking about the gospel, its implications, and what it means for people in America whose experience I just don't have. We have to, you know what I'm saying? Like we have to think that drastic, in my opinion. Okay, one more story, then I'll stop ranting about this. I interviewed Daryl Hamilton II. He's a black church pastor in New England. And before we started recording, I said to him, "Oh, New England, that's a pretty unchurched area." And he goes, "Well, maybe according to white folks, but no, man, we're here." I'm like, "Oh, you're right." Like even that idea of what areas are unchurched or not is shaped by my white evangelical understanding of what it means to be a church. I know for a fact so many churches in my area who are like, "Oh, we got to reach New England. It's a really unchurched area." And Daryl was like, "Are you kidding me? Like we've been here for years, like there's been decades of church history here. You just don't see it because you don't think about us when you think about the church." That paradigm has to shift if we're going to make real change. Like I'm at that point in my journey where I'm like, I'm done. Not that I'm telling people leave your church right this second. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm done coddling the idea of if we just try hard enough on the inside of some of these institutional white evangelical spaces, we can make the change. Because you know why? I've watched people fight like hell in the SBC to maintain the status quo as serial sexual abuse comes out. And then I watch those same people kick out Rick Warren's church for ordaining a woman. And they did it. I think like 80% of people, of delegates voted to kick out Rick Warren's church over ordaining a woman in leadership. And yet they were stonewalled as an organization to get justice for the serial sexual abuse that was hidden in the organization. And the SBC was founded over the right to own other people. Why are we trying to maintain this?
There we go.
Right? The gospel will go forward without the white evangelical church. It will go forward without Hillsong, without elevation worship. People will find other places, arguably a more just and inclusive and radical gospel that tells people to be in solidarity with the people under the boot of empire like Jesus was. So, end of rant, I guess, but like, I'm just kind of fed up, Jamar. For 2025, I'm like, leave loud. Let's go. Let's build some new systems or just find some new places that are already established and learn from them. And let's, especially as white dudes like me, let's learn instead of trying to build new everything. You don't need to plant a new church, Pastor. Maybe go back into the job market, find a job, and just attend a church and listen and learn. You don't have to have the answers for everything.
That's what I needed to hear from you, Tim. That's what I wanted to hear. I needed to know.
I've been stewing on this.
How deep down and how far you were along this journey. And thank you for saying it to your audience and using your platform for it, because it's what Black people have been saying for a really long time.
Yeah.
So let me get into it. Now, if you're in a delicate place, go ahead and turn this off right now, because I'm done couching this and qualifying this. I'm just going to speak straight up. And this is not my podcast, not my platform. You can take it or leave it. But here's the real. You talked about parallel economies. There's also parallel ecclesiology. Parallel ecclesiology, meaning that what happens in the white church world and what happens in the Black church world are hermetically sealed off from one another. And Black people know this and are aware of this. And we know what's actually going on in white evangelical spaces, but the reverse is not true. Such that if something's not happening in white evangelical spaces, then it's not happening.
Right.
New England is unchurched because white people aren't going to church. Well, what about Black folks? What about Latino folks, Asian folks? Now, I'm going to focus on Black folks because that's what I know. You are famous, or you could be Black famous. You could be famous.
That's true.
You could be white church famous. You could be Black church famous, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are entire mega movements, books, multimedia ministries, teachings, every conferences out there that white people have never heard of because they happen in Black church spaces. Now let's talk actually about why there is a Black church.
Yep.
Well,
say it.
Racism, white supremacy. Think about this. Prior to the Civil War, many Black people went to church with white people. That's not because they were more racially progressive prior to the Civil War. It's because white people forced Black people to go to white churches, because when Black folks got together on our own, then we plotted liberation. We plotted rebellion. We plotted freedom. So they wanted to keep control and an eye on us and tamp down. And they had horrible things like you couldn't get communion at the same time. If you were a Black preacher, if they let you be ordained, you could preach to Black people, but not white people. You needed a white person to preach to a mixed race audience or to white people. You had to sit in the balcony, which doesn't sound so bad now in 21st century.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about the antebellum area, pre-air conditioning, where was the hottest place in a building? Heat rises. You don't want to be sitting in a balcony for 2, 3, 4 hours, right? This is the kind of thing that Black people went through. So what happened after the Civil War, when we got some forms of freedom and emancipation, one of the very first things we did was start our own churches. Why? Not because we were arguing over the Trinity or the authority of Scripture or any of these foundational Christian doctrines. It was because we didn't want to be treated like second-class citizens in the household of God.
Yep.
We didn't want to walk into church and be told you can only sit in this segregated area. You have to get communion after white people. You can't be baptized in the same baptismal font as white people. We did not abide that. And so we started our own fellowships. And so now we're in a similar place. Now white people are actually walking into churches and saying, maybe I'm not treated as a second-class citizen per se, but there are so many beliefs and there are so many things wrong here that I don't know if I can stay. And to your point, leaving isn't just about walking across the street to the next white church or starting another white church. Leaving means sitting at the proverbial feet of marginalized people and learning from them. Right. So if you want to hear from me, I told you I study race, religion, and social movements. I think the civil rights movement in the 21st century is going to be multiracial, but Black-centered and Black-led, which is not to diminish the suffering or the voices of any other people. It's just to talk about the specific history of the United States connected to racism, Jim Crow segregation, and the like. It will be very predominantly women-led. Women have always been the foot soldiers of the movement, but they will be in front this time and not relegated to the background as they were even in the Black civil rights movement. It will be it will incorporate class, but not as a replacement or a substitute for race. So it's not going to be an either or thing. Both and are going to be part of it. And white people are going to be part of it in many background roles as foot soldiers, people populating the movement. Also, using their resources, whether financial and material resources or relational resources, the connections you have to other people. Tim, you're becoming a great example of this. Just letting someone like me come on your show, rant about these things. That's a resource that you're sharing. I've been doing this work for over a decade in public, and I've been Black my whole life. I don't get the same kind of exposure. I got fortunate to have a book that was ready and available in 2020 when white people stood up and paid attention to race. Color of Compromise did not become a New York Times bestseller because Black folks and people of color paid attention, because we always are. It became a bestseller because white folks finally paid attention.
Yeah.
Right. So that's I don't have the same kind of access. My stuff is great. And I say that because I put in the hours.
It is
I put in the dadgum work.
Right.
And I'll put my work next to anybody. Do enough people know about it? Heck no.
Right.
Is part of that because of the parallel ecclesiology? Heck yes. So I'm just saying, you're right. Probably time to leave. This is my last portion of the rant. If you don't know by now, what will it take?
Right.
Here's what we've been through. We've been through a Black Lives Matter movement that started with the murder of Trayvon Martin, and the acquittal of his murderer became a national movement in August 2014 with the killing of Mike Brown. We saw Trump come down the stairs in 2015, June, declaring that Mexicans were sending rapists over the border. And I mention that because we often think about 2016 and the 81% of white evangelicals who voted for Trump. But that was a year and a half after he entered the race with 24 Republican presidential hopefuls, right? So it got whittled down to him with white evangelical support.
100%.
We've seen Trumpism not take over churches. That's just the newest label. We've just seen this public coming out of white Christian nationalism in churches, such that they support this man no matter what he does, and no matter how at cross purposes he is, not only with their material interests but with the gospel itself, right? Then we've seen a COVID-19 pandemic, which I have a whole other rant on, because we could have prevented thousands of deaths had we not had that presidential administration in office. The president himself almost died from COVID. People forget that. We also had disparities in healthcare that were just magnified during that entire crisis. In the midst of that crisis, you have a historic uprising for racial justice. By the numbers, it dwarfs even the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. It was massive. Then you have, right after 2020, January 6, 2021, an attempted insurrection where these people who stormed the Capitol got closer to winning than Confederates did than the Civil War, in the Civil War, right? And people just brush that under. They push back against impeachment. They push back against the January 6th committee. Then you have everything else that came after that. And I'm saying, if that hasn't told you where your congregation, your denomination, your tradition stands, what else will? What more do you need to see to say they're not changing?
Right.
I need to move on.
Right. I agree. Does data matter or not? Does truth matter or not? This is, I think I told you this offline. I talked to quite a few people when I'm alone in my guest bedroom and need to rant, and I'll shoot an audio message to you or someone. And I was thinking about what is the major, like, if I had to pinpoint all of my grievances and frustrations with this white evangelical thing that really radicalized me to be a Jesus person in the beginning, it is how they have traded the truth for a lie while calling it truth. Watching them reinterpret the word truth. I mean, I read the books, The Case for the Creator. I read, all the apologetics about how important it is to stand on truth and data and fact in order to understand our faith and what it means to be a Christian in the resurrection, and how important truth was. Truth. I mean, Ben Shapiro famously said, facts don't care about your feelings. but it's actually a lie. These people are driven by their feelings of grievance, their feelings of resentment, their feelings of everything's being taken away from me. And they trade the truth, like St. Paul says, for a lie over and over. The fact that we live in 2024 with more information ever at our fingertips. Our phones now have ChatGPT integrated into them with the new iOS update, right? The fact that we have a lot of people, mainly Christians, mainly white Christians, who believe that the 2020 election still to this day was stolen is, to me, remarkable. It is unbelievable. It's like debating a flat earth, right? We have so much evidence to demonstrate that the election was indeed not stolen. Court cases, Trump's own legal team admitting, yes, we have no case. We're not actually arguing that. I mean, there's mounds of it. There's a Mount Everest-sized pile of this data. And to have Christians be like, no, we're standing on truth. It was probably rigged. What truth are we talking about? You literally, Trump is their epistemology, right? Whatever Trump says becomes their new reality. If Trump says that immigrants are poisoning the blood of a society, oh, new data point, reinforced by a right-wing media empire that is ready to amplify the propaganda of the incoming regime. And so it is very difficult growing up in a white evangelical space and believing that truth matters and integrity and no compromise, all of these things. I mean, there are songs in the hardcore Christian band scene that tell you no compromise that I grew up on with the Mohawk rocking out to, like, yeah, no compromise. I'm never going to change. You know, I'm never going to sell out to the world. And then I watch my tradition pay the 30 pieces of silver to Trump.
There it is.
Right? And say, you know what? This Jesus thing is fine, but the power, the control, the empire looks a lot shinier right now. Looks a lot shinier. And Trump said, great, just bow down and kiss the ring, and this will all be yours. And evangelicals said, we can do that. I mean, don't forget, Jamar, Trump Jr. famously said at a Turning Point USA event a couple of years ago, you've heard it said turn the other cheek, but it's gotten us nowhere. And they applauded. If that is not an antichrist spirit, if that is not Barabbas, right? If that is not that imagery of who are you going to choose to serve? Who do you want freed? I don't know what is. And so for me, as a Christian who believes in trying to have radical allegiance to the way of a nonviolent Jesus, I can't stay in spaces that are looking at this and going, yeah, Trump and Trumpism and MAGA and this right-wing media politics sphere, this is biblical. These are Christian values. This is the way of Jesus. No, it's not. No, it's not.
And it's absolutely not going to get any better. It's not going to get any better.
No, definitely
Once January 20th comes around and the inauguration, obviously we're going to be subject to these pernicious policies, but also churches, Christian groups, they're going to be continually called to take a stand. To make a statement about where they stand on these issues. And this is how politics is impacting the church, right? Politics is about real life issues. And so the churches are going to be called to take stances on what's happening. And the churches, I mean, you know, we just know how this works, especially institutionally. The churches that by now haven't taken a stand in opposition to some of this stuff, it's not likely they will. Or if they do, it'll be on this one thing, but not the avalanche of other issues, right? So that's something to contend with. And so what do?
Right.
New wine for new wineskins. We do need new organizations. We don't need new white-centered organizations unless you want to perpetuate more of what's happening. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be quote unquote white Christian nationalism, but it'll be a sort of colorblind white liberal progressivism that says a lot of the right things, does a couple of good things, but doesn't really move the needle. Right. What will move the needle? White people take here's the analogy, right? Public schooling. Okay. I was a public charter school teacher, which is a whole other story. But the pattern over the past several decades is when white people leave public schools, they take their resources with them. Then the schools decline because they don't have the resources. And then everybody says, look, see, we can't send our kids to these public schools. They're doing so poorly on the tests. They have such discipline problems. Their teachers are underqualified. Well, guess what? It's because there were so many white people afraid to send their little white kids to school with little black and brown kids that they resegregated. And in the resegregation, it's not just, oh, people with different skin colors are in separate places. No, the resources are in separate places, right? So until white people decide to stay or to go where black and brown people are and invest in it the way they've invested in their own churches, their own private schools, their own neighborhoods, their own communities, we won't see the change, not because you're white and white is somehow better and you make everything, because you have hoarded resources for centuries. And when you take those resources from the people who have the least, it gets worse for them.
Yep.
And you never feel it because you still have the resources. I
Right.
told you, I'm just speaking straight up. I'm not gonna coddle you.
Good.
If you don't believe me, study the history.
Yep.
So what does it take? What do we do? Where do we go from here? White people do not need to take the lead in the broader movement. You just don't. What you can take the lead on is talking to other white people and challenging other white people. Because me as a black person, number one, I don't have access to those same spaces. And number two, it's dangerous if I do.
Yeah.
You gonna send me to a TPUSA conference?
No.
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 No. That ain't
You're not allowed.
Wise, that ain't safe. I mean, but you can go, Tim, and you have gone. And I'm just saying this as an example, right? You do have access, and there will be some who are called to a prophetic ministry toward white people who are practicing or adhering to the beliefs of white Christian nationalism. You're going to be called to decry that in spaces and with people who I don't have access to or cachet with. And that's something only white people can do. And it's something that white people need to do.
Okay, well, let's get down to brass tacks. And you're allowed, let me not just say you're allowed. I insist, no matter what, you give me some brutal honesty. We're friends, all right? The equity is there. I'm giving you full permission. I don't care if it's my podcast or our podcast. Just give me it straight. I agree with you. So let's just call out the elephant in the room. You're on a white-led organization's podcast. I mean, I am a bro-evangelical passing dude. I have the look. I can talk the talk. And when I started all of this stuff, I didn't know what I was doing. I just started asking questions. It blew up. And for whatever reason, a lot of factors, people found us and we became a nonprofit. And I feel weird even saying this, but we're kind of like one of the leading organizations in this space now, 100%. Which is just, again, as a no-name volunteer drummer with no education, like it just blows my mind that I'm here. And also, to your point, I'm a white dude who is the, on paper, executive director. We have a board, it's pretty diverse, but still it's white-centered, white-led. So for folks like me, folks like or organizations or even influencers like me, how can we do the work that we need to do that's both and? Because I kind of hear two things over the course of the past few years. One, you can't control the privilege you have, so use it for good and use it to get you in spaces to speak truth to power. And also learn from people who are not like you and sit at their feet and let them lead as you follow. Yes. So what's the advice you would give to someone like me? Straight up brass tacks, New Jersey directness, don't sugarcoat it. How can we keep doing better to do the work?
Continue to grow your platform and then direct the people who follow you toward others, which is a lot of what you're doing. I would say, and all the more. So this is just Jamar. You can talk to someone else in this work and they may have another opinion. But to me, it's not a matter of, well, TNE is doing great, but now you've done great enough. So stop all that and, redistribute, right? Maybe it gets to that point. But I think right now, what we're dealing with is a media ecosystem that others haven't figured out yet. You figured out pieces of it and it's really working. And so now what you can do is pass the ball. Now you can say, hey, thank you for showing up. Here's someone you should listen to. Here's someone you should learn from.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing you can do is be, I don't know if this is the best term, but a shadow supporter, right? Like, it's going to be more helpful for someone like me who's Black trying to speak to Black people not to have to show up on a white guy's podcast. But if you fuel my podcast or Substack, and I'm not just talking me, right? I'm talking anybody who you think that we need to be listening to and learning from, how can you come along behind and beside as a quiet partner
Mm-hmm.
in their work so that they can continue to be at the forefront and they can because here's another thing that white people don't often think of. As Black people, we have to have integrity with our own communities.
Mm.
If we're seen as associating so much with white people that we're out of touch with Black people, we won't have credibility with Black people,
Yeah.
right? So I'll show this recording on my page, right? But I don't know that it's going to really help build my credibility with Black audiences, except insofar as I'm speaking very honestly about race, and we need to hear that no matter what the circle is. So being less visible, I think, is a big challenge for white people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't continue to do what you do and do it well, but as it grows, how can you be that silent partner who comes alongside other ministries and other people doing good work and says, all right, I'm no strings attached. I'm not going to tell you how to do what you need to do. And let's also not underestimate money. Like, we want to make this race thing so complicated. When I said the original sin was greed, that's money talking, right? So if we can sort of redistribute, I know that's a toxic word for some people. I don't care. If we can redistribute some of that wealth, some of those resources, that's a huge help too. So I don't know if that's enough tea, but that's, I just, even having this conversation is a help, but we're just entering this period. It's going to be chaotic.
Yeah.
It's going to be unpredictable. I can't
agree.
honestly say how bad it will be.
Right.
I'm anticipating it's going to be very bad. Maybe not. Hey, that would be great. But we just don't know. So the best we can do is be the kind of people who are like Jesus.
Yeah.
Can I be old school like that? I don't want to get so progressive that we forget this is actually about a person. Jesus Christ, who came and lived the way that we should all live. And that we have a perfect example of how to treat other people and how to have relationship and how to heal and how to forgive. And so I think what's happening with white Christians right now, you're realizing the church as it stands isn't what you thought it was or hoped it would be.
Right.
And in order for that to be true, you're going to have to take up your cross daily and follow Jesus.
Yeah. The reason why I chose this topic for the first episode of the year is to set the tone that we're going to be asking some really hard questions. We're going to be asking questions around loving our enemies versus, the opposite of that. Like, what do we do in an oligarchic society that is ruled by billionaires who are killing people with unfair, healthcare systems? Like, how do we navigate that kind of stuff as Christians? And beyond. Like, we have to have some of these real, no pun intended, but come to Jesus moments of like, okay, so enough of the head talk. What do we actually do? When your 2 feet get up in the morning, what are they walking towards or away from? That's what I'm concerned about the most right now, right? Because we can spend, and I've interviewed so many biblical scholars over the past couple of years, and I love it. I love getting nerdy. I love debating theological realities or non-realities. It's fun. It's good. It's helpful. Good theology matters, okay? Don't misunderstand. But at some point, I need to know what my 2 feet are doing and what my arms are doing, right? Because of those discussions. At some point, are our feet moving away from toxic churches? Or are they moving towards toxic churches, right? And I think we have to start having those real conversations, especially in light of an emboldened Christian nationalist movement that got their guy in power and in office, who is so far, as of this recording, making good on his promises to try his best to carry out mass deportations and to stack his cabinet with Christian nationalist people like Russell Vogt and many others who believe that they have an obligation to rule over America on behalf of their very white God. That is a red alert moment. This is a crisis moment. The worst case scenario in my mind has happened. Trump has gotten power. He's more radical than ever, ready to give his radical base what they want. We need to think about true resistance. We need to think about true solidarity. We need to think about the left and right, but also, to your point, the top versus bottom, right? We need to have a multiracial movement of the working class saying, no more, no more. And so there's a lot of work to do. This is going to be the year, I think, of a lot of activism, a lot of organizing, and a lot of people like me and others saying, if you're a white evangelical and you're kind of grossed out by all this, show it and peace out. Find more beautiful churches. They're there. They exist probably in your community that you never even heard of, that are doing really good work, loving all of their neighbors. And it's time for, I think, another kind of white flight to take form, if you will. Yeah. Out of those white evangelical spaces,
Well, and my last word on a practical tip is this: learn from the Black Christian tradition.
Yeah.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
There is an entire Christian tradition that was birthed in the United States in direct opposition to racism, white supremacy, and everything that goes along with it, including political abuses of power, theft of community resources, and all of that. Now, how do you do that? Well, I don't care. Shameless plug, the spirit of justice.
Yep.
Over 50 different figures from Black Christian history profiled, and I'm not showcasing Black suffering, I'm showcasing Black resistance, what we did to push back against injustice. But here's some more practical stuff, and I'll use the framework I introduced in my second book, How to Fight Racism. It's called the Arc of Racial Justice. It's an acronym that stands for Awareness, Relationships, Commitment. This is not linear. This is a constant cycle of developing awareness, building relationships, and committing to systemic change. How does that work out in this coming season? If I want you to learn from the Black Christian tradition, how do you do it? One, you develop your awareness. Read the books, or here's a cool thing. We have this thing called the internet. Turn it on and tune in to some Black preaching. Go listen to Otis Moss. Go listen to Tyler Burns. Go listen to Ekemini Uwan, Christina Edmondson, a host of Black women preachers, right? And you don't even have to leave your house. You can be washing the dishes, going for a run, whatever it is. So if you're a little bit hesitant to take that step to actually enter physically a Black church space, do so digitally and get introduced to some of the teachings. And what you're going to find, the reason why this is important is there's a completely different framing. The questions that white churches are asking and addressing and the questions that Black churches are asking and addressing tend to be very different, especially when it comes to justice. Then what you're going to do is you're actually going to build relationships. Don't leave it digital. Relationships can be one-on-one, but it's better if you get into a community, and that doesn't have to be a church. Maybe you attend the local NAACP meeting. Have you ever looked up the NAACP in your area? Where do they meet? Who's the president? Can you have a phone call? Can you send an email? Can you ask, hey, what resources do you need as we go into this next regime? Maybe you attend a meeting. Maybe it's a school board thing. Maybe it's a whatever, but you get in vital relationship with people who are different from you. And then what happens is, in the midst of all this awareness raising and relationship building, you start to feel a burden. It's going to be a particular burden that is specific to you. It might be about education or literacy. It might be about climate. It might be about neighborhood zoning. It might be about reparations. But what's going to happen is you're going to have a burden for a particular issue that you want to go in on. And that's the commitment aspect, which doesn't just mean staying the course. It means committing to systemic and institutional change that doesn't work on just a one-to-one level, but on a broader scale. And that broader scale doesn't have to be the country or the world. It can be your city. It can be your church. It can be the community, right? And what you're going to find is as you get into those spaces and you demonstrate courage, because it's going to take courage. Here's where I get spiritual. God has given you a spiritual gift. It says in 2 Corinthians, I believe, now to each one, God has given a gift and for a purpose, for the common good. So what you're going to discover is your spiritual gift, whether that's teaching or hospitality or prayer or whatever it might be, that is not just meant for you, it's meant for the common good. And you're going to find a specific way that you can exercise your spiritual gift, because these battles are not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in the heavenlies, right? You're going to find ways to employ your spiritual gift for the common good. And when you do that, you find yourself being conformed more and more to the image of Christ. And that's our call. That's our challenge.
I love that. I think he gave some really great tips, and I like how you brought it back to some kind of spiritual paradigm. I think that's really important for us as we navigate 2025. For a lot of people who maybe deconstructed, weren't sure how to maybe like navigate a more compelling spirituality, and I think it's important for us to start using some of that language again and saying no, like we do believe this as Christians. That there's something going on here. Jamar, we have a lot of work to do this year, and I just want to say I appreciate you coming on and being the first guest of 2025. A lot to think about for sure, and we'll keep the conversation going. So as always, my friend, great talking to you, and thanks for making time.
Thank you.